Hi, I'm Sid Sheridan, a ghost whisperer for the San Diego Police Department. If that sounds nuts, well, you're not wrong. But around here, magic, mystery, and murder are 3 peas in a cozy pod. The Woman in the Kitchen, a short mystery by Amber Fisher. Are you sure you really need me for this? I asked, glancing dubiously at the mansion looming over us. This place doesn't look haunted at all. I'm no use to you without ghosts, I said, digging my hands into my pockets. Detective Hidalgo slapped me on the arm good-naturedly. You can't fool me, Sid. I'm a good student and you're a good teacher. And under your careful tutelage, I've learned you cannot tell whether a place is haunted just by looking at it. Besides, I think you might find this case interesting. I followed the detective into the house. He didn't even bother to knock, which I thought was weird. But things got even weirder when he walked into the house, made a beeline for the kitchen, slumped down onto a bar stool, and shouted, "Ma, I'm home!" My jaw dropped when I saw her. Even if Hidalgo hadn't just shouted "Ma" at the top of his lungs, I'd have recognized this woman at 20 paces. She was a spitting image of her son. Or, I guess that goes the other way around. They looked just alike, though, is what I'm saying. After they hugged and kissed and we made introductions, we got down to business. Hidalgo raided the pantry and dug out a package of Oreos, ripping it open. Then he said, "So, Ma, now that I got Sid here with me, tell me what you saw." Mrs. Hidalgo's expression faltered as her hand fluttered nervously to her head, where she patted at her perfectly coiffed silver hair. "Well, I know it sounds strange, and I know it makes me sound like a fool, but I know what I saw." Detective Hidalgo stuffed a cookie into his mouth. "And what was that, Ma?" "I saw my old friend, Katerina LeBlanc, murdering her husband." I blinked. This was not where I saw this conversation going. "You saw it?" I repeated. Mrs. Hidalgo sighed. "As I said, I know how it sounds, but I'm not insane and I have perfect vision. Well, when I wear my glasses anyway, and I was wearing them. Anyway, I was paying my good friend a visit. Katerina and I have known each other since we were young women. We both taught advanced mathematics at the high school back in the day." "My mother is very smart," Hidalgo put in through a mouthful of Oreo mush. Mrs. Hidalgo grinned. "Thank you. Katerina is too. And unlike me, she won't let you forget it. She'll fact-check you to your face if she catches you relaying a false fact. But I digress. I was dropping off a drill I'd borrowed, and as I was coming up the back walkway, I saw Katerina through the window aiming a gun. And I saw her shoot her husband." I looked over at Hidalgo. "I'm guessing there's a catch," I said. Hidalgo swallowed and nodded. "You're a smart cookie, Sid. That's why I like you. A couple of unis went over to the LeBlanc place to check out the story. Mrs. LeBlanc admits her husband is missing, but she swears she wasn't involved. Plus, she has an alibi." My brows arched. "A good one?" "Airtight," the detective said with a shrug. "At least a dozen people saw her at a party that night. And by that night, I mean at the same time Ma swears she saw her friend shooting her husband." "Well, that's impossible then," I said, glancing back at Mrs. Hidalgo. "You're sure about what you saw?" Mrs. Hidalgo stiffened. "I'm certain." Again, Detective Hidalgo slapped me on the shoulder. "And that's why you're here, pal. If anybody can get to the bottom of an impossible case, it's you." I sighed. I had no idea what was going on here, but I knew one thing. This had nothing to do with ghosts. Nope. Which was too bad, because I had a feeling this was going to be worse. Back at the station, Detective Hidalgo and I made a list of people we should speak to. We didn't have much to go on, other than the fact that Mr. LeBlanc had indeed gone missing. We called his office and confirmed that he hadn't been into work. We called his only living relatives, but no one had heard from him. Strangely, they also didn't seem concerned that he was missing. "Don't you find that odd?" I asked the detective. "Nobody seems to care where he is at all." "Well, maybe he's a jerk," Hidalgo supplied with a shrug. "Not everybody gets along with their family. But at least we have one lead. His sister recommended we talk to someone named Patty McDougal. Apparently, she's pretty close with both the LeBlancs. Let's pay her a visit." A little while later, we arrived at the home of Patty McDougal, who ushered us into the house. She offered coffee, but Hidalgo declined, which I wish he wouldn't have, because coffee sounded great. "We just have a few questions for you," Hidalgo began. "We're looking for Ernie LeBlanc. He seems to have gone missing. Have you heard from him or seen him recently?" Patty shook her head. "No, I can't say that I have." "Is it like Ernie to take off unannounced?" I asked. Again, the woman shook her head. "Not that I know of. Truthfully, I'm not as close to Ernie as I am with Katerina." That wasn't what I hoped to hear, but I leaned into this information anyway. "How do you know Katerina?" The woman smacked her lips and folded her hands as she got comfortable. "I met her in grief counseling years ago," she said. That piqued my interest. Grief counseling? If you don't mind my asking, what was she grieving? The woman looked nervous for a moment, and for a second I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she said, "I don't like to tell tales out of school, but if it will help you find Ernie, I guess I can make an exception. She'd heard through the grapevine that her estranged sister had died. She was mourning the fact that they never mended their relationship." "Why were they estranged?" Hidalgo asked. Patty fretted her hands, nibbling on her lip. "It was ages ago, just after Katerina and Ernie were married. The sister, her name was Sophia, was a bit of a freeloader, always asking for money. Katerina eventually cut her off, and I guess it didn't go well." She dithered, her expression distraught. "I don't like to gossip, but my understanding is that Sophia was a con woman. Identity theft, stuff like that. I don't know much more than that, though." I glanced over at Hidalgo. "Is there any mention of a sister in her case file?" I asked. Hidalgo shook his head. "A sister is news to me. Not sure it helps in this case anyway." He returned his attention to Patty. "Do you have any idea where Ernie might have gone? A cabin somewhere, maybe? A favorite getaway?" Patty grew thoughtful, but eventually her expression turned sad. "I wish I could help you with that," she said. "Ernie and Katerina had a lot of favorite vacation spots. I guess that's one of the benefits of being wealthy." I blinked. "They're wealthy? I thought Katerina was a teacher." Patty clucked her teeth. "Oh, honey, don't tell me you don't realize wealthy people can still do good in the world." She chuckled at her joke, but quickly sobered when neither of us joined in her giggles. Katerina was always embarrassed about her husband's money. She grew up very poor. She worked to keep herself honest, not because she needed the income. Plus, she's very well educated. It would have been a shame to let her brain go to waste. Her face took on a nostalgic look, which she quickly shook off. Anyway, to answer your question, they often went to the Poconos, Fiji a few times, and I think they have a timeshare in Madrid. I turned to Hidalgo. If he went to any of those places, he'd have to buy a plane ticket. Maybe we should check his credit card. But Hidalgo was barely listening. "Tell me more about Katerina. Does she love her husband?" Now, Patty bobbed her head up and down enthusiastically. "Oh, yes! She and Ernie are crazy about each other." The woman paused, her eyes going wide. "Don't tell me you think Katerina has something to do with Ernie's disappearance. It's absolutely out of the question. She adores that man. She'd never do anything to harm him." "What about the money?" Hidalgo asked. Would Katerina benefit in any way from her husband's death or disappearance? Patty's mouth arced into a frown and her shoulders stiffened. I don't like what you're suggesting. And anyway, I wouldn't know. That's personal. Hidalgo nodded, thinking this over. I see. Well, you've been a big help. Thank you for your time. We'll see ourselves out. We left Patty's house and sat in the car, thinking. I'm not sure what to do next, I admitted. We don't have a body. We don't even have an official missing persons report. All we have is your mother's word that she saw Katerina shoot her husband. And I'm not saying I doubt your mom, I said before Hidalgo could argue. I'm just saying it's not a lot to go on. Hidalgo nodded. You won't get any argument from me. I guess we should wrap this up. The right thing to do is go talk to Katerina. We should let her know that if her husband doesn't show up in a day or two, she can file a formal report. Otherwise, he shrugged. You're right. There's no case. Okay. Well, let's go see this alleged shooter. We found Katerina LeBlanc's place easily enough. You couldn't really miss it. As soon as we pulled up, I let loose a long whistle under my breath. Wow, Patty wasn't kidding. These people look like they're rolling in the dough. We knocked on the door, and Katerina answered, dressed in what looked like pajamas. She led us through the house and out to a large patio out back. It's very good of you to come, she said, settling into an expensive-looking patio chair. But I don't know that it was necessary. I don't know where Ernie could be, but I'm sure he'll turn up sooner or later. If he doesn't, Hidalgo said, please make sure to file a report. We can't really do anything until there's a report. If you can't do anything, Katerina said slowly, then why are you here? Hidalgo didn't miss a beat. You're friends with my mother, he said, Beatrice Hidalgo. She wanted me to look in on you and make sure everything was okay. She said you used to teach together at the university. Katerina's face softened. Ah, yes. Your mother is such a good person. I'll have to thank her later. Well, can I offer you any refreshments? Katerina disappeared into the house, leaving me alone with Hidalgo on the patio. When she was out of earshot, the detective leaned over to me, his expression dark. All right, listen, Sid. I need you to go inside and check the place out, he whispered. I have a hunch. I blinked, looking into the house. I was really hoping for that coffee. A hunch? About what? What am I supposed to be looking for? Hidalgo winked. I think you'll know it when you see it. Now go. Hurry up. I wasn't sure what Hidalgo was playing at, but I did as I was told. I stepped inside, taking a quick survey of the place. It would have been nice if he'd given me a little direction, since the house was pretty huge. I shuffled around downstairs, keeping my ears open for anything unusual, and poking my head into various nooks and crannies. I didn't see anything noteworthy, though, so I headed upstairs. Just like on the first floor, I didn't find anything. Finally, I poked my head into the master bedroom, assuming there'd be nothing to see, when I stopped short. Katerina stood at the far end of the room, her back to me as she stared out of a window. Her shoulders shook softly as though she was crying. She'd changed her clothes, too, which I thought was weird, though probably more appropriate. It was probably embarrassing to entertain guests in your pajamas, even if the guests were cops. Katerina? I said, taking a step nearer. The woman startled, turning to face me with a hand pressed against her chest. She looked surprised. Are you okay? Before she could answer, though, the booming sound of Hidalgo's voice cut through the air. Hey, Sid! You still using the John? What's taking so long? I jumped, throwing a look back at Katerina, but she'd already returned her gaze to the window. With a shrug, I headed downstairs and made my way for the porch. Geez, Hidalgo, you in some kind of hurry? I said jokingly. I stopped mid-sentence. Sitting on the patio was Katerina, and she was back in her comfy pajamas. But that was impossible. I'd just seen her upstairs in regular clothes, crying at her window. She wouldn't have had time to... And that's when it hit me. I gasped and turned to face the detective. "You were right," I breathed. "I found what you were looking for. There's a ghost in the bedroom that looks exactly like this lady here." Hidalgo jumped to his feet and whipped a pair of handcuffs from a pocket. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for the murders of Katerina and Ernie LeBlanc," he snarled. "Care to share your last name, Sophia? Because we already know your Katerina's estranged twin sister." As the detective cuffed the woman and called in the arrest, I gaped at both of them, unable to process what I'd witnessed. "But how did you know?" I asked, stammering. "I didn't even know, and I always solve cases before you. How did you figure it out?" Hidalgo chuckled and nodded toward the scowling woman. She really was a dead ringer for the ghost crying upstairs. "She gave it away," he said. "I had a feeling something was wrong when she didn't recognize me at the front door. Ma shows my picture to everyone," he said with an embarrassed chuckle. "So I let it drop that they used to work together at the university, but they actually worked together at the high school. And remember what Ma said about this Katerina lady?" Slowly, understanding dawned on me. "Your mom said she'd fact-check you to your face if you got a fact wrong," I said. "Okay, but how did you know the real Katerina was dead?" "That was just a hunch," he said with a proud smile, "but it made sense. You heard Patty say the sisters grew up poor and then had a big fight over money. Money is always a motive, Sid. Plus, Patty said the sister was a con woman. A con woman who, I'm guessing, faked her own death. She's probably been planning to kill her sister and her husband for years. It would have been easy to steal her identity, slip into her life, and spend all her money. Ain't that right, doll?" When Sophia didn't answer, Hidalgo clapped her good-naturedly on the arm. "That's right, save it for your lawyer. You're gonna need a good one." To me, he said, "Looks like Ma's not crazy after all. She saw a murder, all right, but it was this con woman here doing the deed while her sister was at a party. Then when Katerina got home, Sophia took her out too." The detective shook his head in dismay. "It's a shame when family turns on each other." I didn't have much to say about that. I was no expert in families. But as the sirens grew nearer, I saw Katerina's ghost drifting outside. Slowly, she came to sit beside her handcuffed sister. She placed a hand on Sophia's knee, though her twin couldn't feel or see it. I was the only witness to this moment. It felt so intimate, I had to look away. This woman murdered Katerina and her husband, and yet, somehow, Katerina still loved her. Well, it just goes to show, you never can tell with people. Or ghosts, for that matter. As for me, well, it looked like I'd helped Hidalgo solve another case. With any luck, it would be our last case for a while. Then again, luck has never exactly been on my side. If you liked this story, be sure to check out all the books and audio projects on my website at amberfishermedia.com.